Joining us now is a member of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury from New Mexico. I really appreciate you, especially coming on today as you're awaiting those documents. Is there a sense yet of what the estate will be providing the committee?
Yes, good morning. So we are expecting the estate to produce documents that House Democrats forced a vote to subpoena, which includes non-disclosure agreements, the infamous birthday book, the plea agreement that was made with Acosta, financial transactions, and literally any document that is implicated in any form in sex trafficking or the crimes that Epstein was convicted of. But, you know, I think we have to also accept the reality that his estate is being managed by the same individuals who were also involved in both the financial and sex trafficking crimes that he has been convicted of. And so I think in the same way that the Department of Justice and the president have been engaging in a cover-up in collusion with Congress, we are expecting documents to be produced compliant with the subpoena, but, you know, we're going to have to continue to dig and follow every lead.
So I just want to make sure I understand you, Congresswoman. Are you suggesting that what you get may be sanitized compliance?
Well, we'll see what they produce this afternoon. There are attorneys on both sides of the aisle from the committee traveling to New York City today to look at the underlying documents that will be transmitted electronically, because you are allowed to redact for the protection of minors and for the victims. But we want to make sure that all of the documents that are available are produced, but we also don't know if documents have been destroyed. We don't know what in its entirety the federal government has its hands on. So there's still a lot of digging to be done.
So do you have a sense yet of which of these documents might best help push the investigation forward?
You know, I think, as you just mentioned in your interview last week, we're being told by the attorneys and the survivors to follow the money. And, you know, the exhaustive look into J.P. Morgan this morning in the New York Times is important, but we also know that Deutsche Bank and other international banks were involved in the financial transactions. And I just want to make something very clear. This is about crimes, corruption, collusion, and a massive global cover-up. This is not a few isolated events. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of young women who were trafficked, not just in the United States, but across borders. We're talking about immigration fraud, as you said, fake marriages. I mean, this is a massive case that involves actors that are far beyond just Epstein and his immediate employees. It involves financial institutions, potentially foreign governments and actors. And I think it's very clear. I mean, let me just say this. I did not have it on my bingo card that members of Congress would be using the tools of Congress to shield pedophiles from accountability. And why the Speaker of the House and the President of the United States are engaging in a cover-up to stop these files from being released by the Department of Justice, I think behooves of us to continue to track down every lead we can until we can expose to the public what is in those files, and accountability and potentially prosecutions can be had.
So if you do get some financial records today, what is the likelihood there will be more subpoenas to follow the money? What could that roadmap look like? And did you get some guidance when you had those survivors for a couple of hours, I think, of conversations?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all in the financial records, and what has not yet seen the light of day in the public eye is who was receiving and transmitting those financial transfers. And so we'll see what the estate produces today, but we will absolutely be following with further subpoenas. The committee has already asked for financial statements from the Treasury Department, but we do expect to hopefully also subpoena bank records from various banks that were involved in other financial institutions.
As someone who has had access to both documents and conversations with people that the public who was asking for answers have not, it struck me as you were talking about a situation that was massive and global, involving hundreds, if not thousands, of teenagers and young women. have you even been able to wrap your mind around how it got to that place?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of why this case is continuing to be in the public eye is because it speaks to a larger reality, which is that the systems that are supposed to serve the public good, the government, the justice system, the financial institutions, were colluding in this massive global sex trafficking scheme.
Joining us now, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin, MSNBC Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian, and former federal prosecutor Temidayo Agenga-Williams. He was also senior investigative counsel for the January 6th Select Committee. Julie, lawmakers have asked for a slew of evidence related to the Epstein case. So where do their efforts stand going into this week?
Yeah, and specifically, we're talking about on the lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee, because I know there are parallel efforts going on with that separate discharge petition to try and force the Department of Justice to release these files. But essentially, what's going to happen today, we expect, according to a source familiar, that the House Oversight Committee will begin to receive redacted versions of certain documents subpoenaed by James Comer, the Republican chair of the committee. You see them there on your screen. Specifically, what they're hoping to see is that so-called birthday book, the one in which, apparently, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, Donald Trump then in 2003 essentially wrote and drew a doodle for Epstein. Democrats on the committee are keeping their eyes peeled to see if that is ultimately included in what is turned over by the estate today, which they expect it to be. Also, phone logs, flight logs, anywhere they could potentially see any connections with who Epstein was in contact with, who his associates were, a bigger breadth than what we already knew over the last 2 decades. And certainly there's a lot more to be seen. Remember, this is going to be redacted. It's going to take time for them to go over this stuff. And certainly for Democrats, at least, there is some skepticism that they might not be able to trust what the estate is turning over.
And so, Julie, then there's the group of House staffers from the Oversight Committee that are expected to travel here to New York City to look at documents with Epstein lawyers from the Epstein estate. So is the information they're getting in that visit supposed to be different?
Well, that's going to be the unredacted version, potentially, of some of the documents they're already receiving today, including that birthday book, including the phone calls, the flight logs. And that's where I say Democrats don't necessarily trust the state. They trust the process because of everything we've seen play out, of course, politically over the last couple of months since this really came out into the ether. But that is why a bipartisan group of lawyers on the committee, Republicans and Democrats, are going to travel to New York City later this week, I'm told, to sit down and meet with the lawyers to see redacted versions of these documents to make sure that nothing that they are trying to redact from these pages from the public view actually needs to be redacted. Remember, the whole purpose of redactions is to make sure any private personal information is not in there, to protect minors that were potentially involved with Epstein back then. That is the purpose for these redactions that has been instructed not only, of course, by Democrats, but by Republicans who are leading this investigation in the committee. So we'll see what they see later this week, if that matches up with what they're expected to see today. And then there's also the question of, will they release these to the public? We know the committee already released about 30,000 pages of documents handed over by the DOJ. They expect to release this stuff too. We just don't know when.
So, Temidayo, what are you going to be watching for with this new evidence from the Epstein estate? What could be potentially most illuminating?
Well, I think it really depends what you're looking for. I want to draw a distinction between a congressional investigation and a DOJ investigation, right? DOJ investigation is focused on finding out crimes, and there's longstanding DOJ policy that you don't release that information unless it results in a criminal charge. Here, we're dealing with a congressional investigation, wider in scope, really a lot more unrestrained, and it's not about finding offenses. So that's where concerns about hearsay or undeveloped claims or just connections can be used for political purposes. So as for what I've been looking for, I think first is what's redacted, and does it stay about just protecting private information, or is it about minors, or is it really about protecting names of individuals that have political connections there? And in DOJ, it's a lot more expansive to protect people. Right here, we have those restraints really taken off, and I'd be concerned because those individuals cannot defend themselves in any kind of forum because there's no court of law by which they can answer these accusations.
To that point, Ken, we know the DOJ is now arguing that the identities of 2 individuals who received large sums of money from Epstein back in 2018 should remain secret. What's behind all of this? What do we know about these payments?
Yeah, this is quite interesting, Anna. Citing privacy concerns, the Justice Department has asked a federal judge to deny a request from our NBC News colleague Tom Winter to unseal the names of 2 associates who received large payments from Epstein in 2018. These people were referred to in court documents as potential co-conspirators. Court records show that one associate received a payment of $100,000 from Epstein, and the second received a payment of $250,000. This was in 2018, days after the Miami Herald began publishing a series of investigative stories shedding light on what victims considered a sweetheart plea deal that Epstein received in Florida in 2008. Now, as part of that plea agreement, Epstein secured a statement from federal prosecutors in Florida that the two individuals we're talking about here would not be prosecuted. One of these people was said to be an Epstein employee. Prosecutors said the payments may be evidence of efforts to influence witnesses. Now, of course, Anna, this is exactly the kind of information that victims and many members of Congress believe should be made public.
Temidayo, they were protected from prosecution. They were paid 6 figures by Epstein. The DOJ now saying we got to keep their identities under wraps to protect their privacy. What do you make of that argument, given the situation we all find ourselves in?
Well, there's a long history of that. They were not charged. If DOJ at the time believed they had evidence of their crimes, they could have been charged, they could have been arrested, brought into a court of law, given a forum to defend themselves. Now they don't have that. So if there's a decision to release those names, we should consider the implications in a lot of cases. A lot of people are investigated for crimes all the time, and prosecutors exercise discretion not to move forward. Down the road, if the government says we're going to unseal that information for political purposes because it's expedient in that nature, that opens up a kind of Pandora's box. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but the implications that are bigger than President Trump should be considered.
It looks like Congress is, at least at the committee level, is making a big rejection of Donald Trump's demand to just quash this quote-unquote hoax. Remember, Trump was the one who said back during the election that he was going to open everything up and he was going to finally bring transparency and justice to everybody involved in the whole Epstein case, right? However broadly defined. He was going to release it. And then he got in and he kept saying it, and then he said the list was coming out, and then that changed around May, and we now know the reason it changed is that Trump was informed that he was in these files. Now, we don't know the exact nature of his inclusion, right? It could just be that he's in there a lot because him and Epstein were friends, but he's not directly implicated in any specific activities. We don't know. The point is, he thinks it's embarrassing, at least what's in there, doesn't want people to see it. And he's basically telling his congressional buddies to block it. And he starts calling it a hoax, therefore calling all of these brave women, liars and conspiracy theorists. That's what he's effectively saying, right? Because he's saying this whole thing's a hoax, and so all these women talking about what happened to them, not just in recent weeks, but over the last 20 years, he's saying it's all a hoax. And also implying, at least implying, I don't know, he hasn't said this explicitly, that maybe like his pal Jeffrey was like a victim of a witch hunt. Is he saying that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are innocent and it was all a big hoax that was made up to take down his friends? We don't know, but people are interpreting it like that. At least some folks are. But this isn't how Congress is approaching it. If Congress was approaching it like that, then the House Oversight Committee would be wrapping up on this issue, and they would not even bother accepting, let alone demanding, files from the estate. The fact that they're doing that is a direct rebuke of Trump's demand that Congress treat this like a hoax. They're not.